Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today is episode 173 of Podcast 2 for 1, youtube.com/2for1 studios, the best place to consume all the content. And if you didn't know, listeners, and let's be honest, you probably didn't, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Hill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas, that they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year.
Kapow.
Daniel, it's 173, and we are back to finally talk Ahsoka episodes 1 and 2 on Disney Plus. And we've been, I don't remember, I think maybe it was D23 2020 that this was announced, maybe 2021.
I have no idea.
I don't remember, but it's been a long time. It's been at least 2 years. And we've had
this announced before we saw Ahsoka in The Mandalorian? Or was it after we saw Ahsoka?
I think it was announced after that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. After that. Which that was a long time ago. Season 2 was, right?
Yeah.
There's a good gap there because of the pandemic and everything else. So we're here with Ahsoka now, though.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we both have thoughts. I watched them the night of the release, which cool on Disney's part to drop them at 7 o'clock our time, or maybe it was 8 o'clock our time, because like, have I stayed up to like 12 or 1 in the morning to watch some of this stuff? Absolutely. But like, it makes sense to drop it like during prime time. Yeah. And that way people can go wake up in the morning, go to work, and have kind of water cooler talk, right? And talk about the show. And I think it's super valuable instead of waiting all day long to get back home to then watch it. So it's one of those things, like it feels obvious.
It makes more sense from a marketing standpoint, right?
I think so too.
Yeah.
And so I hope that's a trend going forward, and we can kind of keep that up. But I want to hear your thoughts, and then I'll of course give you mine afterwards.
Sure. Yeah. So I finished the second episode today. I've watched the first one yesterday and watched the second one today. And I will say that, going into this, my Star Wars expectations have been pretty firmly low, right? I mean, since we last got, what was even the last thing we got Star Wars? Mando season 3. Right. Which was a mixed bag, a pretty firmly mixed bag. I think there was some good, there was some not good.
Firmly mixed, yeah.
But before that, we had Obi-Wan not too far before that, which was just a total letdown. Like, in just every single way, that was a letdown, pretty much, in my opinion.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
There's like literally maybe 10 seconds of that show that's good. It's like, yes, this is what I like this. And then the rest just, And then we had Boba Fett before that, and that was just another letdown. And so, like, Star Wars had this trend where, like, the sequels came out and they just like demolished the goodwill for their IP in a very short amount of time. And then they started building it back up with The Mandalorian, and he's like, oh, Star Wars is good again. Yay. And we were part of the people championing, that idea. And now they kind of started slipping down again, and in some ways it feels similar to even how like Marvel is slipping down, where it's just, it doesn't feel like the management of their resources is going to the right things. Like the money's going to places that aren't helping the product be good or something along wherever Obi-Wan Kenobi put that $200 million, it didn't go in the right places, right? Because it didn't translate to a good product. Something went wrong there. And so I think going into Ahsoka, that was,
don't forget about Andor real quick.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Because Andor feels like it doesn't exist within like the same universe of all this other Star Wars content. It feels so markedly better and different that it's easy to forget it's Star Wars, which, right now is a compliment. Maybe in 10 years will not be, you know what I mean? But like, anyway, so that's kind of the picture of my expectations going into this. And I will say, for the most part, I've been pleasantly surprised. Okay, this does not have the same hallmarks that Mando season 3, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Boba Fett had, which to me felt like it felt like telling the coolest story and taking your time doing kind of methodical, slow building storytelling was not a priority with those. It just felt like kind of going from moment to moment, whether it was a nostalgia hit or just whatever it was. It just felt like we weren't getting the kind of stories, or like the level of stories even we got with like Andor, or the level of storytelling craft we got with Andor, where you just felt like someone that knows what they're doing is in charge here and is making sure it looks this way, sounds this way, acts this way, whatever. And I do feel like Ahsoka is giving me that. I do feel like Dave Filoni is in charge here. I feel like we're getting some really nice cinematography. We're getting some, I think the costumes, the production design, which has always been pretty good in almost everything Star Wars we've gotten, since Disney. But I feel like that is all cohesive with the story, cohesive with everything. Nothing has felt like really out of place for me. The dialogue to me has been pretty good, pretty natural, and just it feels like someone that knows how to tell a compelling story and is been given the leeway and the time and the resources to tell that exactly like they want to, is in charge here, rather than it feeling like we're having to appeal to certain demographics, or like we're having to, have so many like nostalgia characters on screen at certain times, or whatever it is. So I will say that, like, I feel like I'm pretty happy with the direction the show has started on. I like the characters. I like the world. I think the story is interesting. And my big complaint so far is it's been a bit slow for me. I will say I do feel like that, and it's not like this egregious thing. It's like just sometimes it just feels like scenes are like 10 or 15 seconds too long, right? Like we just didn't need that much time watching a character contemplate. Like we could have gotten the point a little bit sooner and kind of gotten to the next bit of action or the next bit of plot or dialogue or whatever it is. And so, but that's like my biggest complaint right now, right? I really love the Dark Jedi they've introduced. I love everything about, I mean, the saddest part is that, like, is it Balon, whatever his name, the actor's passed away. And so like, this will be the only ever instance we get of him. And he's one of the best new characters on screen, which is like, that's a bummer. But yeah, I mean, I think, I feel like Rosario Dawson is doing great. I really like all of the characters that are from Rebels. I do feel like I should have rewatched Rebels really recently to this in some ways, because I feel like it's picking up on some direct threads that I might be a little bit more tuned into if I was more fresh on that. But yeah, I mean, visually it's looked great. I don't feel like I'm seeing a lot of bad CGI or cutting corners and those kinds of things. And I love where it's going. I know it's going to get really exciting and really kind of impactful for like just bringing big characters back and stuff like that. But yeah, my big complaint is just it's just been a little bit slower to me than maybe I was hoping or anticipating for. And what is this, a 8 episode series?
I don't know the answer. We can look it up real quick, and I'll kind of give you my spill. Go ahead. Yeah, I think it's interesting. So just a couple of points here. One, I do feel like I too should have watched all of Rebels beforehand. And I did watch a recap video, which I'm typically always against, especially for things that I want to watch. I've seen most of the first season, and I know some of the broader strokes. And I've known for a long time where the show ended and what happened to Ezra and Thrawn. But there's a lot of little things that I didn't know about that I learned relatively recently with the recap video. That being said, I do think you can drop in casually for the most part and kind of understand what's going, if you have some basis of like how the world of Star Wars works. I think if you've watched some of the movies and watched, I think you could, for the most part, pick up on a lot of things. And I think it's interesting. I think if we look at Mando season 3, I feel like Ahsoka is kind of the inverse of that in a lot of ways. Where I felt like Mando, it was more style over substance, right? And it was great on the technicality and those kind of things, but it kind of narratively, it didn't do the things that I think we, at least us on Podcast 2 for 1, didn't do the things that we were hoping for, right? Some more of the in-depth mythology building and also more so pushing the universe into like a stronger, more disconnected place than we are with the original trilogy, right? We got some paintings of the sequel stuff in Mando, and we got some just kind of more status quo shifts. But I think that one of the stronger things that Ahsoka's doing that Mando didn't do is we are kind of, it feels like we're actually growing the universe a little bit right here. It feels like when we see the map of the galaxy and they talk about an ancient alien civilization has been here from a different galaxy.
Yeah.
When we kind of see those kind of things, and also kind of knowing Filoni and his work with Rebels, with like the World Between Worlds and some of these other spirit things, and seeing all that, it kind of gets me excited. Like, okay, maybe we can kind of actually grow the universe here in a fun mythology level way. That being said, it has the technicality that Mando does. I think at times not as nearly as bad as Obi-Wan. There are times, of course, I'm like, they're in the volume right now. I get it. Yeah. But for a TV show on Disney Plus, where I'm paying $8 or whatever it is now, maybe 15, that's still pretty damn good. It's not too bad. I think sometimes our expectations can be like, well, it's the budget's as same as a movie, but it's the budget spread across 6 or 7 episodes versus an hour and a half to 2.5 movie.
Sure.
But I do think my big complaint here is that the characters feel very slow, like you mentioned. And I also think, I don't know, it just kind of feels like there's no sense of real urgency in a lot of ways, even between the characters and their motivations. And I've seen a fair amount of Ahsoka through the cartoon stuff, and I'm not sure Rosario Dawson's portrayal. I think she's doing a great stoic, contemplative Jedi Ahsoka, but I think she needs to be more energetic. I feel like she doesn't give much emotion. Like, she's giving emotion, but I think she's doing what she's told to be done, I think. But I don't know. I just feel like she needs more energy, and I need to see her happier or sadder, or she's really reserved. And I don't feel like the Ahsoka in the cartoon was that way. I feel like she was this person that was shitting and getting, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the cartoon, for sure, she represented in some ways the younger audience perspective, right? She was the youngest kid, the more kid-like character on the show in terms of main characters.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think there is like even the Ahsoka that we got in Mando was similar to this one, right? A little bit more stoic and slow.
But it works whenever she's not the main character.
I agree. And what I will say is I agree. To me, it's not bothering me yet, because I'm expecting them to explain some of this, right? We already know Hayden Christensen is credited in the show. I'm fully expecting us to get some flashbacks that build in some of what's been going on with Ahsoka up to this point. It is believable to me that the Ahsoka that we got, and really like the last moment we got with her, like from before Anakin became Darth Vader, was the final season of Clone Wars that we got a couple years ago. And I will say, like, those last couple episodes, she is not her chipper self. Like, she's realizing that everything's going to shit. She's realizing what happened to Anakin. It's everything
chronologically, the last we get of her is the end of Rebels, right? That's closer to the end or middle of New Hope. It's kind of in that time frame, right?
Right.
Or maybe not. Maybe I don't really exactly remember. I think. But there's a good chunk of, it's when Ezra leaves, right? She's wearing like the big robe, and like she looks like a, straight up master Jedi or something.
Sure. Yeah, I guess to me, I see that. I guess I'm expecting them to explore that.
Sure, I hope so.
And I think, it's that thing of like, well, right now, like a lot of the internal, the arcs we're kind of focusing on internally have a lot to do with Sabine and Ahsoka and their relationship right now. Right. And so I believe at the end of Rebels, they like Sabine leaves with her to be her apprentice. Right. I'm pretty sure that's where the Rebels show ends.
I don't know. I feel like
too many years since I've watched.
But I feel like no, because I think this was new information that, she's Ahsoka's apprentice. I feel like no. You
may be right. But either way, like they are they're continuing some sort of threads that come from a previous show, right? Which I think is part of where, like, even I feel like maybe some of these slower shots might mean more to me if I just finished Rebels like last week and I was already really connected with these characters and just wanted to see where they are now, kind of thing. You know what I mean? That might make more sense, or I might not be as bored with that. But yeah, no, I think that's a valid criticism. I think finding a way to make the Ahsoka that we're getting in live action feel like the same person that we had in the cartoon, they're going to have to go into the past, I think. And they're going to have to show us some of the transition or at least the moments that really pushed that transition, right? Because I think, you know, yeah, it is a bit of a disconnect. And I think maybe part of this is it's just, you know, in a cartoon, maybe it feels more natural, or it's more realistic just to have characters be more cartoonish, you know, big and loud and
yeah,
kid-like.
I mean, you're right.
You know what I mean?
You're right.
And so some of this might just be we're going from animated to live action, and some of that is just a different interpretation. But I agree with you. I guess I hope that they kind of flesh that out that transition.
Well, I just hope the pace is picked up. I think when you're with the Dark Jedi, this somber kind of contemplative kind of, I think that totally works.
It does.
I just, especially when you have, it's Ray Stevenson, who I love, and I'm very, very sad of his passing.
And I will say, I think episode 2 is better than episode 1 for me. I think once we got to Corellia in episode 2, which, by the way, thank you for showing one of the like most like popular, like written and like talked. I mean, Han Solo's from Corellia. You know what I mean? Like the Millennium Falcon is a Corellian like ship that they were designed at Corellia. And so like I love that we're going back to a world we haven't seen in like years and years and years, but that is also very important already in the universe. And we kind of got I would say a fun sequence there. I think I mean, once we got there and we were kind of walking with that guy, I can't recall his name. He's a pretty famous actor. I've seen him in a ton of stuff. The kind of like the overseer of the Corellian shipyard stuff. Anyway, when we were walking with him and they were kind of poking at the questions, and then when they like the whole escape sequence with the freighter and Ahsoka fighting with the lightsaber stuff, that all worked really well for me. And I had no issues staying kind of tuned in. Right. Yeah. And so I'm hoping like that's the beginning. I mean, like that was like the second half of the episode, which then ended with like the last little Dark Jedi moment. When they were talking about, you know, finding Thrawn or giving Thrawn back to them and what that means for us. So I agree with you. And I guess my optimism comes from like the last, you know, 30 minutes or so of the most previous episode kind of got into the pacing I'm wanting from it. And if they kind of continue that, okay, like that's a good, it's going in the right direction.
It was smart to drop both back to back. I mean, I feel like
you're right.
If they didn't have that second one, they may never intended that, but they may have been like, look, this one's a little slower than we want, so we need to do 2 to kind of make sure we grab everybody. I think that was the right play.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think if that kind of gets fixed a little bit, you know, and again, I just don't know yet how I feel about some of the pacing and within the dynamics of the relationships. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I only have really one other grievance, I will say. It's that Sabine gets stabbed with a lightsaber. And I'm like, so she can survive, but Qui-Gon Jinn can't?
Well, hers was on the side and his was in the middle. You know, like in Star Wars, the heart's in the middle.
Yeah. You know, but like, it's like, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it felt.
I agree.
You know, it's just a constant continuity thing of like what kills you and what doesn't. This happens across every medium and every IP, but it feels like the lightsabers, they're always changing, right? Like sometimes they get hit with a lightsaber, Kylo Ren does, and it scoffs his shoulder. Sometimes Sabine gets stabbed. In
A New Hope, when Obi-Wan chops off the dude's arm, it's bleeding. In every other interpretation of lightsaber, like when I remember from the book, at least from the old like the legends, was like you don't bleed from lightsaber.
No, it cauterizes
because they cauterizes it immediately. And so to a degree you're right, and to a degree it almost feels like Qui-Gon dying from the one stab right into the middle of the gut is just kind of old storytelling a little bit. Like that's just not how, like even in modern days when we're seeing someone die, it's a bit more grotesque. We're going a little bit farther, I feel like, even in just how we're showing like good guys dying. And I'm not sure him just being stabbed once in the middle of the belly would even, if they made that today, if that's how that would happen. That almost feels like a kind of a form of the past, or maybe a form of like kids entertainment.
I'll disagree with you. I think that I agree in the fact that we go further now, and like it feels like our heroes are more invincible than they used to be. I'll agree with that. But stabbing someone through the gut with a lightsaber will do it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, probably. I mean, like if it's going all the way through, and I mean, like it's like,
well, we know it did.
I want to be
it's a lightsaber.
Say what? Yeah,
we know it did.
We do.
You know what I'm saying?
We see it come out the other side.
I mean, both. I mean, I'm talking both times. Qui-Gon versus Sabine here. I mean, maybe I'm nitpicking, but I think that was kind of like a weird thing.
If she got stabbed through just the gallbladder. And you don't really need that anyway. You know, I hear you. There's ways that my like little kid mind can be like, yeah, no, I mean, come on, like, Qui-Gon died because he got stabbed through the spinal cord, and it went straight through his spinal cord, and like
this
you
is
can't
a
survive
nitpick.
that.
This is a nitpick for sure. Yeah. I thought it was kind of weird, but anyway, talk about some of the positives here.
Sure.
And there's a lot of them. I think, again, kind of going back to this mythology building, I love the idea of an ancient alien race that I don't know about that's visiting this galaxy. And I love the idea of Thrawn coming into this universe in live action and his return. The thing I kind of have questions about is I have a few questions. One of them is on just a storytelling level, like, please don't bring Thrawn in the last episode. Sure. And it feels like it could be that. I feel like if we're got to get to Thrawn and get to Ezra, then it's kind of like I suspected, Daniel, I could be wrong, that this is season 1, there'd be season 2, and then the movie that is coming out would be the culmination of this. Sure. And I really don't want this to be a slow burn of just moving the pieces to get to the fun stuff.
I agree. I had that interpretation too. Something at the end of the most recent episode made me think they aren't going to Thrawn; they're bringing Thrawn to them. Which I was like, oh, that might be faster then, because like that seems like But I agree. I mean, I think here's the deal. I'm okay with it if they tell good stories in between. If they tell compelling, arcs for these characters and grow them and give us good action scenes and give us good stakes that aren't like the world ending but mean a lot to these characters and like have impact on them and on the small world that we're seeing. It can there's a version of it where we don't get Thrawn to the end and it's great, but I guess, and I think this is it's interesting because I feel like the whole time we're talking about this, we're talking about a show that we generally like. But it's hard not to focus on the negatives. And I think that's part of just like the state that we are in, or that a lot of people are in terms of just the Star Wars IP.
We've been hurt too many times. And
yes.
And also and you and me specifically, I would say more than the average fan, we're a little more attuned to the machinations of like how these stories work and like our expectations and also just, our critical eye of it all.
Sure. And so I think part of the reason it's seemingly easy, I think, right now to focus on the negatives and focus on like, well, I'm afraid of this, I hope this doesn't happen, is because that's just been kind of the general trend of Star Wars in the past. And it's felt like even the idea of like, I don't want Thrawn to show up at the end, I think that to me comes from like, well, that feels like we get a season where nothing happened. We've already felt like we've gotten seasons where it feels like there's just filler episodes. And there's just like, no, like you're not giving us what we actually want with these characters. And the problem then is that the filler episodes aren't good. They aren't good character arcs, or they aren't exciting, or like, or whatever they are. They feel lackluster. But and again, I like the style of storytelling in Ahsoka feels different to me.
Well, it's more serialized, right? I mean,
more serialized. It's more serious.
Mando was more, Mando was more whatever the week, hunt of the week.
And everyone is all taking the whole universe incredibly serious. There's no silliness. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, we had some droid bits, but the droids are always fun. I mean, Chopper in the last episode that was really fun watching.
And he looked animated, like in a way that, I mean, he not CGI, but I'm saying like he looked he was doing things typically
Yeah, like
only
he did that, like
animated
flexing or
characters
whatever at
could
the
do.
end.
Just the way
Yeah.
the metal moved. I was
Yes.
like, oh, they're kind of translating some like animation style of the droid into
Yeah.
live action, which I appreciated. I
thought
liked
I liked the moments with Chopper. I thought
the
they worked well.
the cat alien cat thing that Sabine
Yeah.
has. That's probably one of the best looking prosthetic things I've ever seen in my life.
It looks really good.
Or
I
practical
agree.
effects. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looked
No, it looks
amazing.
good. I will
That's,
say
like,
that when they
perfect.
revealed the like mural of like the heroes from the rebels, I was
weird.
like, it shouldn't have been in that animation style. They should have tried to
No.
make it look more like real people being painted
Yeah.
than it having like just looking like the cartoons. Because that just felt
Yeah.
that one moment was the only moment where I'm like, oh, this feels a little less realistic. This world.
Yeah, I mean, apparently that's exactly what it looks like in the cartoon.
Yeah, I know. You
But
just
I
should have
100%
interpreted it to like a
I
more
100%
realism
agree.
style. Yeah.
There's nothing else like it in Star Wars,
No,
live
no,
action
no.
Star Wars at
Yeah.
all.
Right.
I totally agree. It's cool seeing one of the witches of Dathomir being
Yes.
involved here. That's
That was
neat.
cool. No,
Same- which ties into Mando season 2. That was her whole
Yes.
thing of Ahsoka's episode, which I was kind of surprised. Like, oh, we're actually picking up on that thread like from 30 years ago.
yeah. I like
you know.
seeing the more. I know we got a lot of this in Andor. We got some of this in. I can't remember what else. Probably some other ones, but seeing the right after the end of the Empire Rebellion, where there still is a lot of like, yeah, of course. I like the whole thing where they're like, yeah, of course
Kinda tired of
we
it.
couldn't fire all the Empire like people, like we just
Yeah.
it wouldn't have made sense. I think it's not anything new, but they're continuing to kind of explore that idea and make that relevant, which I think is nice.
I thought it was nice until season 3 of Mando, where we got a whole episode that really didn't do anything for me. With the
Oh well, yeah, well
that was just
that's
a waste of it.
that was its own thing. That was all connected to Snoke or something, and that was its own weird.
The council, the Dark Imperial Council, whatever it is, and
yeah.
Gustavo's
Oh yeah,
return, and then also I think Pelion is on the council, which is Thrawn's second command. Pelion is. Here's the thing too. I'm kind of curious about those. So here's the fun part of Star Wars, and again, I don't want people to think I'm down on it. I think I'm just skeptical.
Yes.
And my expectations are very high, even going into Ahsoka.
And I think honestly, because it exceeded my expectations that were already pretty low, it's like I'm tentatively optimistic about the future. Like I'm like,
So I
okay,
think
this is showing me
I
some
was-
things that I've been wanting to see from Star Wars, like at
Yeah.
least in style. Like at least that it's different than the past. It doesn't feel like I'm just getting a Boba Fett with Ahsoka in it or something like that, or an Obi-Wan show with Ahsoka. But I can't fully commit to being optimistic about this show yet, for me personally, because I think of that. It's just that we've been let down consistently.
Well, we've heard. I've seen all these headlines. I'm not sure about you, about like this is the best Star Wars show ever, and I'm like, yeah, I get we were hurt by Mando season 3 in a lot of ways, but Mando season 1 and 2, they fuck. You know what I'm saying? Like, especially Mando. I mean, like, they just, those things hit on all cylinders in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And there was filler, but it didn't matter so much because there was its own sect of the universe at the time.
And there was a coolness factor, especially and kind of a novelty factor to those first 2 seasons of like seeing this like Mando guy with this awesome gear. Everything's all practical. Everything's so westerny and just like I agree. Those were good seasons.
I mean, it wasn't until Boba Fett, which led us to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then Mando season 3, we started getting all these kind of poor narrative decisions that just kind of compounded one after another, and you're like, oh my god, what's happening?
Yes.
But I say here's a part, back to the fun part of this is I'm curious as to, so they have a map that's getting them that tells them the location where Thrawn is, but like at the end of Rebels, and I've never seen it. I've seen the end shot and end scene, but I don't really have all the context. But Ezra communicates with the Wells that we saw in Mando season 3, and these guys can basically use the Force to travel at warp speed,
Right.
and they can basically travel like a ship can, right? And I guess there's theories. I learned this, which is fun. This is the fun part. It's like I get to learn more about Star Wars. I guess there's theories out there, Daniel, that talk about how maybe people are tapping into the Force in some way whenever they're traveling through ship. Like it's all connected in some way.
Like
kind of.
light speed is a force ability in some way.
Not ability, and kind of implies they're doing it, but it's more like it's a side effect of the Force or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's a mechanism of the Force.
Gotcha.
And I'm curious as to like, okay, so if Ezra sent Thrawn and himself onto these basically the backs of these wells into the outer rim, then it's kind of like, why can't they get back? Who made this map take how do they know this map feels ancient? Like, it knows where Thrawn's at?
I agree. I think they're gonna have to do some explaining. I at least appreciated that it was like, oh, this is from an ancient alien race, rather than it being like Rise of Skywalker, where it's like, so in the last 20 years, someone took all this wreckage and made like a scavenger hunt with it. Like, why? You know what I mean? Like at least it's not that. At least they're like, oh, this
dagger. Oh my god.
Oh, I know. But at least
someone held up a dagger. Someone made a machine
that like
at a
aligned
certain point
a dagger with
sand.
a wreckage.
With the wreckage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's
wild.
It's bonkers. So at least I guess my guess right now is it's this like ancient alien mechanism that like Thrawn was aware of, or someone was aware of, and they used it to do the thing with Thrawn or whatever, and now they're trying to use it to come back. I mean, like at least it's not like, oh yeah, this is the thing we made or something.
Well, I've read the first maybe the first two books, 2.5. I've listened to them, and I've read the comic book versions of the Thrawn trilogy,
the original.
Yeah. And by Timothy Zahn. And I got the impression the Outer Rims wasn't separate from this universe, that it was essentially like, like it was here's our county line, so to speak, right?
It's the circle. It's like the rim of the galaxy, the Outer Rim.
Right, yeah. But now I kind of am getting the impression, because that's all legends, the Outer Rims is a separate almost universe or galaxy.
In theory, no. Like it should, and I guess my understanding was that they are in a different galaxy now. Like I thought Thrawn isn't in the Outer Rim; he's on a different galaxy. I thought the planet they were on was in the Outer Rim.
Maybe I
thing in.
And I don't know.
But at least in the legends, no, like their galaxy is like the Yuzhan Hall, who come in much later,
in
which
Legends,
are an alien race. They come from a separate galaxy, like not their galaxy.
In Legends, that's what I'm saying. Like, I wonder if we're doing some retconning here, where it's like the Outer Rim. Outside of that is, it's like here's our universe, and it's just like another budding universe. There's a way.
Tatooine was near the Outer Rim. That's part of the reason it was like such a nothing planet. It's on the outer rim of the galaxy. No one goes here. It's Tatooine.
Well, there's a way of looking at the multiverse, like, we're parallel. It's like all these things are happening at the same time, but we just can't see them because it's like in a different dimension, right?
Yeah.
There's another way of looking at the multiverse, where it's like this big empty canvas. Right. And there's the universes, but they're self-contained, and they kind of like they're walled off, but they're all in the same space.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's the same place.
Yeah.
You just can't access them because of whatever in between.
Sure.
So, like I don't know. And to wrap all this up, even talking to you through it, and I felt this way while watching these episodes. Which I didn't feel all the way in Mando season 3. I thought, I actually want to rewatch these as I'm going, because that's what I did with Mando season 1 and 2. Like, at an episode drop, I'd kind of watch the previous 2, the previous one, just to kind of dive into it more and pick up on more fun things. And this one has given me enough fun things and like more mythology building, where I'm like, I want to go back and pick apart the dialogue. I want to go back and kind of get some more of the meat potatoes, So I appreciate that about the show.
Yeah. Well, and let me just say, I hope to God Star Wars is not trying to introduce their own multiverse. Like that's one way to get me off the hype truck. If they're just like, hey, we have a multiverse too. That to me is just like you're jumping on a fad that isn't actually congruent with like what the universe of Star Wars is kind of supposed to be, which is kind of like a nuts and bolts. Everything's just, dirty and grungy, and then there's the Force people that are these weird people that are doing this thing over here, but everyone else is just like a normal like blue collar dude that lives in a blue collar universe. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. And I guess when I say multiverse broadly,
sure,
I think when we think about Marvel or DC, we think multiverse with like variants, and we think
Right.
about. And I think the other version I was kind of talking about was just a multitude of universes occupying the same space,
I mean,
which is just basically a extended version of saying a lot of different galaxies, right? But it's
but
not.
they're all in the same physical space, but you like, yeah, but either way, I hope
That's a scientific theory, by the way.
Sure.
That's not me just pulling it out of my butt.
Sure. I hope that's not what we're doing, because I think, again, going beyond the Outer Rim, you've got a blank canvas. You can start telling us some Star Wars stories we've never even heard of, and like
there's really there's no difference. And again, I'm using the word multiverse, but there's no difference than me saying there's multiple universes occupying the same space.
There's no difference other than it's, I think, needlessly more complicated and
You're right.
needlessly convoluted, and to the point where it would make me now distrust their storytelling decisions.
I agree.
And
the only reason I bring that up is because it made it seem like Thrawn can't come back. And part of that may be that he doesn't have the energy or the resources to come back.
Sure.
That may be it, but it feels like, and I hope there's a simple explanation that way, and not something like,
sure,
I can't, because I'm locked off. I'll say this though: Star Wars does have a thing, and we mentioned it earlier, the world between worlds, and that involves time travel. I mean,
right,
and it's been used in Rebels. Ahsoka,
Right.
I believe, dies fighting Darth Vader, and then Ezra pulls her through the portal and saves her.
Right. Yeah,
and he essentially changes the timeline.
Right.
And so that's pretty wild.
Yeah. It again, it's this interesting place where they're exploring some ideas that Star Wars hasn't done a lot with. That Filoni is kind of like the Godfather. A lot of the ideas, they're his ideas in a lot of ways, right?
Sure.
Which is nice that we're getting the creator ideas from the creator of, like, kind of the inceptor of these ideas. But yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where it's like, man, this could be a way to really expand the Star Wars universe, almost like non-linearly. I think because we have sequels that take place decades after this, so we kind of have this idea of like, the events of this show can only change so much the world around it, because the world has to be in the state it's in when the sequels start happening, right? And so I guess, like, there is this opportunity when we're talking about mythology and like these kinds of things. It's like, oh, this could be a way to make the universe bigger, almost like expanding it width instead of like linear length. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, now we're just adding more concepts, more ideas, more like beings, more all these things, and like it could be awesome. You know what I mean? I really like the stuff that they do with the Wills, with Yoda at the end of Clone Wars, and with Ezra at the end with Rebels. I think those are really cool, and I thought they executed them well. And so I hope that happens. I mean, I think it is, and I think it is this, like, it's this double-edged sword where it's like, yes, that sounds cool, that could be cool, but I don't want to swing so hard that we become Marvel, and where it's just becoming everything's multiversal and nothing has meaning as much anymore. Like,
I don't think it's kind of that. I think I didn't use the wrong word, but I think that it's kind of clouded your mind a little bit.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think
the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's where we're heading. I do hope we get more War of the Worlds, just because I think it's fascinating. It's dangerous because it could, like you said, it could break the universe that we know. That's the danger of all these things.
Which could be the right decision, by the way, Dave. If you're listening to this, I don't mind if you break stuff that happens later. I don't care.
No, sure. I meant, hey,
break it, Dave.
If you want to reset the timeline, Dave, right beforehand, like, you know what? We could talk about it.
Right.
We can do that.
Exactly.
I don't know if they would never. I mean, they're clearly not doing it because we have a Disney or a Rey movie coming.
The fact is, they spent too much money making Rey and Finn and Poe like action figures, and like that's half of the reason Star Wars exists is merchandising, at least for Disney's perspective, I'm sure. So like, it's unfortunate thing of like the business side of things means we probably would never do that, even if creatively that might be
Which is another question,
Mark
Daniel, is that
7.
it feels like we might be getting some more answers as to the origin of the Force,
Yeah.
especially if they're talking more about the wells and then the world
Yeah.
between worlds. And I didn't know this, but in Rebels, I guess there's kind of like a embodiment of the good side of the Force. And then there's a embodiment of the bad side. And they're like brother and sister. And like I get and like there's like cave paintings. I saw this in Rebels like recap, and I was like, I need to watch Rebels because there's some fascinating things
it's
going
like
on
stuff
here.
that goes back to it may be it may be the things. I think isn't James Mangold doing like an Origin of the Force
Well,
movie?
here's what I was getting at. It's kind of
Yeah.
like I don't think James Mangold knows about Star Wars Rebels, or you know what I'm saying?
I mean, surely
And
someone's making him know what he needs to know. I mean,
maybe
I hope
now,
someone
yeah, but I'm saying like I can see that project being squashed relatively quickly.
or switching directors. Yeah.
Well, just for the fact that Filoni, I'm hoping Filoni has more power than I think he does because
Mm.
I'm hoping he comes in. They're kind of like, like, hey, we're doing this. And Filoni's like, no, you're not. Like that's what I'm doing.
I think it will depend on how the reception of this
You're
show.
right.
I think
That's
if
part
this
of it.
show knocks it out, if people are talking about Star Wars is back and like, yeah, I think he then maybe gets that power. You know
Again,
what I mean?
I'm not there. I don't work there. I don't see how much Filoni's involved with like Mandalorian. I'm only seeing what they're showing me, right?
Right.
But it felt like Favreau was more involved in season 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then 3, it's kind of like it was Filoni was getting to direct like in season 2,
Right.
and it was becoming like this symbiotic kind of thing. And I'm not sure it helped or not with season 3 because season 3 again has a lot of issues. But or Filoni was working on Ahsoka and then working on season 3. I don't know, but
Yeah.
this doesn't feel like Favreau working on Ahsoka.
No, in a good way. In a good way. In some ways that I feel like sometimes Favreau's stuff feels too sometimes it felt like a lot of like the monster of the week, like everything being kind of self-contained or like mini adventure. That felt more Favreau to me. At least that's what my impression of his stuff has been. It's a bit more it's almost a little bit lighter storytelling. It's a little less about character and it's more about action. It's more kind of about
Those things are
visuals
fine.
and set pieces.
Those things are fine if when you do dip your toe into the bigger world,
Right.
you don't fuck it up. And
Right.
doing those they're great at, the self-contained bounty of the week.
Yes.
But when you have narrative issues of like all the younglings and the dragon season 3, you have Jack Black and Rizzo in an episode and Christopher Lloyd, and then you have
that feels so Favreau, like bringing all these Hollywood people to be in it. That feels very Favreau.
but even when those I'm saying like those episodes versus season 1 season 2 bounty episodes, they just didn't work. Like they weren't very good narratives at all. Like they just had so many plot holes.
Yes.
And then when you get to larger stuff, it's like it's so unsatisfying. Again, it's such I'll never forgive it, but it's just a huge fucking mistake to have Baby Yoda reappear and Book of Boba Fett.
Yes.
And that's just I'll never understand it.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I know that Favreau was the lead writer on all the Mando seasons. Like, I know Filoni is credited on some of the episodes. Noah Clore is credited on some episodes, but they're credited as like writers along with Favreau, right? So to me, it feels like Favreau is the one who decided what the plot line of the season and maybe each episode was, and then maybe Dave and these other guys were brought in to like, spice up the dialogue or.
Well, that's it feels like to me, Daniel, that Filoni is the apprentice, right? Like the apprentice to George.
His content feels more like George Lucas style stories and storytelling than anyone else that has taken the reins since.
But he learned from George. Like he learned from George. Like George was doing the Clone Wars stuff, and Filoni was there.
Yes,
he got I would say the only narrative line to George, and then Disney and Kathleen Kennedy are doing their thing. Favreau's brought on, and I feel like Filoni has had to probably because like everyone's like, oh, it's animation, it's not live action, so you have to even though. Every fan ever would say, no, give it to Filoni over anybody else.
Right.
It's like he had to prove himself and play, and more importantly, play ball.
Well, to an extent, we're also like seeing a transition of like in the mid aughts, even into like the pre 2020. I feel like the animation was considered a children's genre, right? Like even the fact that like, oh well, yeah, Filoni's been doing this really successful Clone Wars, yeah, but that's just for kids. No, adults won't watch that. But the reality was adults were watching that the whole time. They just weren't aware of it. They just did not know that adults were maybe the primary demographic of these shows, right? And so I think part of this too is realize, because like I do feel like when Disney came over, like it felt like in the beginning it felt like Dave Filoni, well, he's done doing Star Wars, like you know what I mean? They're kind of like, oh, we're going to just quietly make all these other shows that have been happening go away because, you know, we're trying to revitalize Star Wars. Star Wars isn't what it used to be, or whatever they thought they were doing. And so in the course of the sequels coming out and those flopping so horrendously, and then being like, oh, wait, everyone loved this shit that we made stop, and this guy that was in charge of, you know what I mean? It was just, it feels like some of this is being like them finally understanding their audience a little better. Like, okay, this is the kind of stuff that they want, the kind of stuff that Dave was doing, the kind of stuff he learned from George. But yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, and part of this is that, like, you know, adult animation is now, we're getting as much investment into that as much as other styles of anime, or like other demographic animation. Like every show, every network and streaming service wants to have their own Rick and Morty now. You know what I mean? They want their own, you know, American Dad or King of the Hill. Like they're realizing that like adults like cartoons, at least in our generation, the generation that grew up on cartoons, we like them just as much as adults as we did as kids, maybe sometimes 100%. More. You know what I mean? And we like it when you put adult situations in cartoon form. It's great. It's
funnier.
It's amazing. Yeah, no, it is. And I think so maybe this is a blend of like, yes, Disney thought they, you know, were taking away from this children's cartoon show director. He does, you know, he's just making, you know, silly shows for kids, and then doing their own thing and realizing, oh wait, the silly show for kids was much better than anything we've done. So let's maybe go back to this guy, and maybe he knows what he's doing and he connects with the fans. And so, I mean, yes, the ultimate version of all this is that Filoni, this show knocks it out of the park, that the Thrawn movie is the best, you know, widely agreed on movie that, like, since, you know, maybe Attack or Revenge of the Sith, or maybe Rogue One. I don't know. There's some weirdos that think Rogue One sucks, and I'm just like, I don't
Rogue
know,
One is great.
I don't understand that at all. But yeah, I mean, like the dream scenario is that Filoni becomes Kevin Feige, or becomes, you know, the George Lucas of the Disney Star Wars universe. And I think at the end of the day, what I think I'm appreciating about when I say, like, oh, I like this style of storytelling, what it feels like is that you've got a really creative person in the cockpit, someone that is interested in cool ideas and wants to tell the most interesting, evocative, like compelling narrative as possible. And yes, it needs to look good, and yes, it needs to, like, all these other things need to be there, but the chief concern of the person in charge is telling a good story that's interesting and that expands on what we already love about the Star Wars universe, right? And so I think that is who I want in charge of all of Star Wars. I don't want someone, and that's to me where I feel like sometimes Favreau is too business side of it. It almost sounds like, well, are you bringing all these cameos just to, like, get more articles written about your show or something like that? Or, like, are you bringing in Lizzo because she's a hot actress right now, and now she's not anymore from all this stuff that's come out recently about her? So it's like, it feels like you're making these decisions not out of what's the best, most important, or most compelling, interesting stories you can tell. Like, how can we tell a story where we can fit all these other random people in there so we can connect with this audience that doesn't watch Star Wars, or make these people that don't maybe watch Star Wars want to watch Star Wars? You know what I mean? And it just feels like someone's in charge that doesn't care about that. They care about telling good Star Wars stories. And that is, I'm hopeful for that, because that, at least in the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka, that feels like what we're getting. Even if it doesn't execute perfectly, at least they're trying. And that to me is like, even like the prequels, right? Not executed perfectly, but George was really trying to expand these ideas and do new, interesting things with them.
I think people will show up for this. I mean, the Star Wars fans know who's doing it. They know Ahsoka. They know they've watched Rebels. I mean, this. I think those guys are probably in. And again, the small discourse I've seen online seems like everyone's like 10 out of 10, right?
It definitely feels like the people that were locked into like Rebels and Clone Wars, like that have watched it a lot and stuff like that. These shows are especially for them. Like they are. Most people can enter into it and pretty much get an idea of what's going on. But if you were a big fan of those, it's like a feast. You know what I mean? Of all the things you're getting to see on screen.
I never once considered this until literally the last 20 seconds. But because you brought up like the need to grab an audience or to get the headlines, I was like, you know what? Is there a chance we'll see Mando or Baby Yoda in this? Is there a chance we'll see Luke Skywalker? Because also it's weird seeing like Ahsoka talk like around this like Mon Mothma and all these kind of people and like it's like man, that no one communicate. I mean, it's the byproduct of like we're adding so much more as this years of decades have gone on of like who was doing what when. But it feels so weird knowing now that like Luke Skywalker is doing his thing and stopping the Empire, and you have Ahsoka and Mando and all these other people who are way more capable than Luke ever was, you know.
No, I mean, I think this is another moment where it's like, God damn, they wish they should have just recast him because he doesn't need to be a big part of this. But like at the final battle, you want Luke Skywalker showing up in his X-Wing with some Jedi students. And like, you want that moment that you get like at the end of Endgame similarly, but not just a CGI version, a version that can actually be an active part of it, like General Skywalker.
And I wouldn't even say it's the one, Daniel. It's the part of like explaining why he wouldn't be there. That's the problem.
And you have to work around that because you don't have an actor casted as him. And I mean, like it becomes a technical problem more than a narrative problem. And
it's okay in Iron Man 3 that his comms go down and it's like the movie takes place within 24 hours.
Sure.
And he can't talk to Captain America and all these kind of like that makes sense.
Sure.
But when you have like Luke Skywalker and he's the guy who stopped all these people, how do you not call him? And he would be the first one there.
He would be there before you called him because he would be aware of this.
I was gonna say, more importantly, he'd be the one probably doing the shit because he's the guy.
Well, he is in the Heir to the Empire novels, right? I mean, he's
the main guy. Yeah. The other two are Han and Leia. Because
and then there you got two new problems. You know, can't have Han and Leia being around. And I think, it's just and that's the thing where it's like. It feels like there's some executive that's like, oh, we can't recast them. Everyone will hate it. We got to just do like. I think some of this is like comes from like prequel fear. Like the prequels came out and all the old Star Wars heads hated them, but the kids loved them, and like, there is this like. I feel like there's this fear in Disney, even like when they originally got the IP of like we can't do the prequels again. We can't make the same mistakes that George made. And so like there's almost this like antsiness of touching like any of the original characters or the original canon or the original like portrayal of certain things, because like to recast that might make some old fans upset or something. I don't know exactly where it's coming from.
It's that mixed with Solo. And funny enough, you brought Corellia up earlier. I'm like, Corellia was in Solo. Like,
that's true, but for like 5 seconds.
I know. I'm saying like, it's an example though of like how much you don't think about that movie. And
the issue was not Alden Ehrenreich. Let me just say that it was not him.
I know that. And
the problem is it was directed by 3 people over 2 different. I mean, the Miller brothers and Ron Howard at the end, and then it just the problem with that was the vision in the beginning.
It was the script. It wasn't
the management.
Everything in terms of everything but the script is fine in that movie.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
But it's weird. They can recast Solo, but they want to deep fake Luke, and then it's just
when you have someone that is freaking
Sebastian Stan
is just a look-alike. It's less of a jump for him to be Luke than it was for Alden Ehrenreich to be Han
and he's in-house. He's in-house. He's been the Falcon. He's going to be in Thunderbolts. He's in-house. Maybe he wouldn't want to do it. That's a different conversation, but
there's a big enough check that can change his mind, guys.
That's true.
And I mean, you're just throwing away money to other places. Why not throw some there?
That's true. That's true. I don't know. We'll see. Again, I had the feeling that we're going to get well, this is a separate event going on while Luke's doing his thing, and which because
yeah.
and it gets expensive. I mean, and they don't have to worry about it so much, right? But it just it makes the world feel disconnected. It doesn't feel like it's actually.
It does.
This is what would actually happen after Return of the Jedi.
It makes it, it just makes it feel like your storytelling is again constrained by these outside forces that have nothing to do with the world and the story.
Exactly.
And I think that has been the problem with Obi-Wan Kenobi show. That's what that felt like. It didn't feel like that was it was all about these other factors of what you had to appease or what you had to do. And I think, again, it feels like we have not liked these first episodes almost from this podcast, because I feel like we've mostly been talking about issues and problems and things we're worried about. But I actually am getting good vibes from Ahsoka in terms of some things, until why can't I think of his name? Dave Filoni is given the actual role of Kevin Feige over Star Wars. He's not the top boss. He's gonna have to have people that tell him, no, you can't do that. You have to do this. But it does feel like within what he can control, he is trying to tell cool stories that expand the universe and that aren't worried about these outside factors. And I think that's
here's the other issue too, Daniel.
That's good. I'm happy. I'm optimistic.
They're using Mando and Ahsoka and all these other things to springboard into the Thrawn threat, right? And so it's like, even with all that going on, I still want Han, Luke, and Leia, primarily Luke, just because he's a Jedi, involved with Thrawn.
Yeah.
But if you do have those characters in there, it becomes Luke, Han, and Leia's movie, and it doesn't become Ahsoka's movie anymore. Or Mando's movie anymore, because those characters are too big for the franchise in terms of it's just going to happen. You can do it if you're really smart and executed well. You could do a movie with all those characters in it that felt good and natural, and like an Avengers Infinity War level thing where everyone's getting small amounts of screen time. But it's hard to do, and I see that fear too of Filoni's well, this is Ahsoka's time. This is my character that I created, and I want to see her go up against the big bad. And I get that, it's a problem. I do see the problem. I do it.
So maybe then that's the reason Thrawn doesn't come there. They go to Thrawn, because that at the very least you could argue, well, they're in a different galaxy. It's not like Luke is next door and could have just ran over to get some sugar and then helped or something. You know what I mean?
That's probably that. Now I think that might happen because it's a narrative excuse.
And no, you're right. I mean, I think it's the thing is, Filoni has his work cut out for him. It's not like it is an easy path to restoring the faith in the Star Wars universe. It's maybe one of the most difficult paths an IP has ever. Has an IP ever gone through such mountains and valleys as Star Wars? I don't know. Has been to the peaks that it has been, and also been as low as in public kind of fandom opinion as that has been.
I don't think so, because Marvel is just hitting its first dip.
Yeah, and really only recently hit its first high. I mean, in the last 10 years, it did what Star Wars did in the 80s and 70s, right?
DC
it took over
is the
world.
closest, just for but it's different, but it's the closest because you had the Dark Knight trilogy.
Right.
And then you kind of had this middling kind of weird graph after that. And you had the Batman 89, Batman Returns forever.
And the issue, part of it too, is that you kind of have unmeetable standards in the original trilogy of these movies changed cinema. These movies changed how people went to movies and acted around movies and
changed
treated
everything.
Movies and fandom. This changed the idea of being a fan of something. There were things before, then there were Star Wars fans, and so part of this is it's being held again. Can it ever reach those heights again? Probably not. But can anything? I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, Mando, I think we forget sometimes because it was happening when Rise of Skywalker had come out, but Mando was huge, dude. And
it was.
Maybe it was the best thing to happen to Disney Plus probably ever. And it's
the best thing Disney has done with Star Wars.
And also think about this. I was losing my mind at the end of season 2 of Mandalorian.
Sure.
I was losing my mind.
Yeah.
And that was special. And so I said that to say that I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know, but in Filoni, I trust. So
far, yes, I agree. I still trust him. I'm excited to see where the show goes next.
I think he cares as much as George did. So that's what I think matters most.
And
even
and I
if
think
George failed, and I think Filoni will fail.
And I'm okay with that if you're failing
and trying
in trying something amazing and it doesn't quite pull off. Again, I think that's why the prequels are held in such. They're still appreciated and loved in ways that I don't know if the sequels will be. I know that there's kids that only grew up with the sequels and their sequels are our prequels, whatever. But I don't know if it's going to have that same in 20 years. People are going to be feeling about the sequels how they felt about the prequels 20 years.
I don't think so. Unless there's so much heavy lifting done on everyone's part to fill things in. But it's what it would feel like. It'll feel like heavy lifting. It won't feel like it was natural. You can't argue with this statement, Daniel, and I know you won't, is that the prequel trilogy, love them or hate them, felt like one voice. And it was the creators of Star Wars voice is what it was.
And the sequel trilogy felt like about 10 voices.
Yeah.
The director had one. There's a producing voices. Yeah. It was
and not one of them was the creator of Star Wars voice.
No. No.
And so at least
and none of them were talking to each other.
No. They were all and so at least, Daniel, we've been using this for a long time. I'm not the first one to do it. We have the apprentice here, and the question will be, can he become the master? That's the question.
Yep. No, it's true. And if he can't, then what does Star Wars have left going for it other than being a brand of toys?
He was a Padawan during Rebels, Jedi in training, and Mandalorian, and now it's the big leagues. And so we'll see. If this doesn't work, then his movie very well could get canceled.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see. There's a lot riding on it.
Will.
Daniel, how can listeners write into us?
Listeners, you can write into bit.ly/2for1mail. Let us know what you thought of the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka. Are you in our camp where you're cautiously optimistic? You're seeing some things you like, hearing some things you like, not really sure how it's all going to pull off everything it thinks it's trying to pull off, but you're still here. You're still looking forward to the next episode, which is something I personally have not been able to say of a lot of Star Wars content recently. But let us know where you fall on these first 2 episodes. bit.ly/241mail.
And if you can't hit us up at our bit.ly, you can always find us in the comment section below, youtube.com/2for1studios. Daniel, what a good pod.
It was good. I mean, every time we talk about Star Wars, it usually tirades into this bigger conversation about the IP. And I think those are fun because I think, we're fans of it as like narrative fans, but we're also just fans of the process and like watching it behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, I mean, again, it almost doesn't feel like we liked these episodes from like just the tone and like the things that we've been saying, but yeah, it's always good to talk about Star Wars, even if it's in a way of like getting out all of my pain,
That's what this show is. Daniel Podcast 2for1 is just a therapy session for Star Wars.
This is what it is. Therapy. We should rename we should rename or have a new show called Nerd Therapy.
It would easily get more hits than we get for sure.
Yeah, that is just like us, like consoling fans about like just talking about fandom ideas at like bigger picture things.
It's not a bad idea at all. Anyway, I'll catch you pretty soon. We have Dr. Bruce Hutchinson coming back to talk another film we're going to break down. We have a more Ahsoka around the corner. Hopefully we can do Blue Beetle at some point.
Yeah.
And all the other many things in the pipeline. And we better enjoy it while we can because the pipeline is running out. So,
yeah, well, I mean, we're probably gonna. I mean, which I'm excited for. Like, we can just start doing some retrospectives. Once what, if you ever want to catch up on TNG, Catherine and I are in season 6 now, so we only have two more seasons.
That's an ass.
We have not been watching every episode. As someone that has seen every episode of TNG multiple times, I have been making some selective skips because.
See, I can't do that. That's where we differ.
Okay.
It would physically pain me to skip an episode.
Sure.
Even if I hated it. Even if I hated the episode.
Fair. I get it.
My name is Donovan Thompson.
I am Daniel Wingfield.
And we